I think we're connecting and we're going live. There we go.
Oh,
Hi,
everybody's here.
yeah. Thank you so much for joining us. This is our monthly Ask Me Anything event with Chill Subs. And today we have Kelsey Evans, who's a literary agent with Rosecliff Literary. And I have some questions that I've prepared beforehand. Some of you have emailed in some questions. As we go, please feel free to throw some in the chat. We would love to have you ask a question live. And so I'm going to go ahead and introduce Kelsey, and then we will get started. So, Kelsey Evans is a publishing professional with a background in communications, marketing, and editing. After a decade helming marketing strategy and content development for agencies with major clients like AAA, Dannon, and Target, she transitioned into publishing. She began as an editor, helping writers shape their work through developmental feedback, query critiques, and revision guidance. Later, she moved into agenting, interning with uh, and I'm sorry, I didn't ask how to pronounce this. Is it
Triada.
Triada?
Yeah.
Triada US and Creative Media Agency, where she gained hands-on experience in manuscript evaluation, submissions, and client development, which are all such useful skills. Passionate about championing authors, Kelsey now combines editorial insight with marketing expertise to help writers navigate both craft and career. She is especially excited to seek out independent voices by tracking breakout self published successes, surfacing under the radar talent, and scouting the indie authors whose sales, platforms, and crafts signal they're ready to leap into traditional publishing. Welcome, Kelsey. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Mm. So I wanted to start with just finding out a little bit about your path, and we got a little bit of that from your bio. But how did you become an agent? Did you always want to be an agent? Was it an
No,
easy road?
it was not an easy road, and it was also not I had friends who, again, I mentioned being an elder millennial to you earlier, but who, when we were younger, knew they wanted to be a doctor, knew that they wanted to be a lawyer, and they sort of went through the motions of doing all of that. And I had a lot of things that I was really good at, and I had a lot of things that I was really passionate about, but I never saw a completely straight path ahead, which is kind of how I found myself in marketing for a little over a decade, mostly in sports marketing. Did a lot of branding, did a lot of sales, sponsorship work. And then I had sort of a brief sojourn as a pastry chef, which is a
Mm.
sidebar that I was happy to talk about. And then COVID hit, and then I ended up in editing and loved that, but really missed the sort of long-term connections that you have when you are, signing a year-long contract with a company, right? Or a multi-year deal for stadium naming rights. Um, there's a sort of depth and length of that relationship that I really missed, and it was something that I enjoyed a lot when I was working in marketing. Um, and so, probably 2.5 years ago, I was at a writing conference and kind of at a crossroads, and I had someone say to me, "Have you ever thought about being an agent? You have the editorial background and you have the marketing and sales background. Um, why don't you combine those two?" And I didn't really know that that was an option. Obviously, I don't have an MFA, but I have a killer work ethic, and I have no problem cold emailing people, talking to people. And so I basically, while I was working a full time job, I was interning for about a year and a half, first with Triada under Brent Taylor, who is fabulous, and then at CMA. And the the experiences there, really from week one, I was like, oh, this is what I've been missing. This is the thing that I get to combine all of that stuff, that business background with the editorial background with, just sort of my personality and my approach to the craft and career, as you said, of publishing for authors. So it was not something that I always wanted to do, but once I started, it was like everything clicked into place.
Yeah, that's amazing. I relate so heavily to that. I think there are a lot of us when COVID hit that found ourselves in a position of like having life so disrupted that we kind of found ourselves on the right path as a result.
Yes.
That's when I came into editing
Oh,
and
wow.
writing more seriously too, because everything was you suddenly found yourself in a vacuum and you got to ask yourself that question of like, what would I be doing if I
Totally.
could, right? So that's amazing. I think there's some people that were having trouble hearing us, but it sounds like other people are saying that the Wi-Fi is working fine. So we'll just move on to hearing more about finding an agent, I think maybe. I think probably the biggest question we get asked is, how do I find an agent for my work? And do I need to have a book finished to find an agent? That's probably two questions, but what would you tell someone who
So, and I apologize. I'm just, allergies in Philadelphia are terrible. So I'm a little scratchy. Um, So it is two questions and it has sort of three answers actually. The second part of the question about do you need a finished book in order to get an agent? If you are writing fiction, the answer is yes. If you are writing nonfiction, then the answer is no. If you're writing nonfiction, then having a proposal is really what people are looking for. And that will include a few sample chapters and that sort of thing. But nonfiction is really a whole other beast. But for fiction, if you're writing a thriller, if you're writing a mystery, then yes, you absolutely should have a completed manuscript. Because if you query an agent and the agent says, I love this, I love the first 10 pages. This is amazing. Send me the whole book. I want to read it. And you're like, actually, it's not done yet. Then that kind of immediately puts a stop, to that conversation. So that's sort of the second thing. And the first thing about getting an agent is one, doing your research, but there are going to be two places that I would recommend that people look, and that is getting familiar with Query Tracker, because that is how every agent I know, myself included, is receiving a query to, potentially represent an author. And then Manuscript Wishlist, there's a website literally called that, and it has editors, but it also has agents, which you may be familiar with as an editor. And the agents all have their wish lists, what they're looking for, right? Whether they represent fiction or nonfiction, whether they don't do any middle grade books, but they do chapter books. So all of that information is available. And those are the two places that I would look to get it.
Okay, that's super helpful. Thank you so much. Um, Now, is for if a writer is interested in finding an agent, does that always happen with the query process? Or do agents ever contact writers to represent them?
The latter. And that has happened. I've had both happen, actually. So I have contacted a writer whose manuscript I had read and she was not represented. And I loved her manuscript and was, again, I think my ability to like walk into a room where I know nobody and be able to have a conversation and make friends and walk away with contacts is really helpful, because that was an instance where I did cold email. She hadn't gotten an agent yet, but she was still looking to pursue, traditional publishing rather than self-publishing. And we had a call, and 2 weeks later we signed and we're on submission with her YA book right now. But I have also had clients who have queried me, and I just fell in love with their work, with their voice, with the story that they were telling, with the other stories that they had in the pipeline. I've been really fortunate. Really, there's not a day that goes by that I'm not just incredibly impressed by the talent that's out there. So it does happen both ways. I will say for nonfiction, it's more likely that an agent would be reaching out to you if you have we're on Substack, if you have a big following on Substack and you're writing about a particular topic, an agent may contact you and say, "Hey, I know that you're talking about this. You have a good amount of people who are obviously engaged in what you are talking about. And the market is ready for X, Y, and Z kind of book. Maybe that's a cookbook. Maybe that's a memoir. would you be open to having a conversation? So there's a lot of different ways that that can happen. There's definitely not a single path to, an agent in traditional publishing.
Yeah, I think that's probably like a dream for so many people is just to be discovered by an agent and be contacted without querying. How many, if a writer is querying agents, um, what should they expect? How many agents do you think that someone might query before they get signed with one?
It's a hard question because there's not a single answer, as is the case with a lot of things in publishing. There's not a there's not a straightforward line. There's not a roadmap, right, as such. And agents can be very unresponsive. Um, it is better to cast a wider net, just like, for sales, the kind of bigger number you have that you're reaching out to, right? The more that the result works in your favor, with the caveat that if you are simply querying agents to query agents and you are not looking at their wish list, if you are not doing your due diligence, right? Then that's really a wasted moment of both like your day and the agent's day.
Mhm.
Um, so I would say the wider net you cast, the better, with the understanding that some agents, unfortunately, take a year to answer a query. Some agents are never going to respond, both of which are incredibly upsetting and infuriating to me, just because I feel like it's really tough, right? Like our days are long, we have a lot going on, but this is somebody's dream. And so that's really hard. Um, and also that, you have to make sure that you are really honing in on the kind of book that you're writing and making sure that that matches what that agent is looking for.
So that connects with two questions that were just asked in the chat. One is, what if your passion project is on nobody's wish list? And I don't know what genre they're writing in, but certainly there's some things that are just sort of like very niche that doesn't come up on an agent's wish list. Should you just try it anyway if that's you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the worst they can say is no.
Right. And
And, you know, traditional publishing is not the only path to becoming a published author. So it is one way, right? But their self-publishing is a booming industry. And so I wouldn't take that as a reflection of your own ability or that the story is not something that deserves to be told, because neither of those are true, right?
uh, how long, you mentioned agents, a lot of agents being unresponsive or taking a long time to get back to you. How long would you give them to respond before you sort of took it as a rejection and moved on?
I mean, I want to say like a month,
Okay.
but that is probably unrealistic for a lot of agents. Um, they're, I mean, the volume that they get is tough. We have an agent that at Rosecliff that opened, and within the first week, she had 1,500 plus queries. And that's just her going through all of that, right? So it takes some time on our end, just like it takes some time to write the query itself. Um, if it's somebody that you really, really like and want to work with, then, I would say wait a little bit longer, give them a little bit longer of a grace period. But I believe also Query Tracker has, um, unless I'm mistaken, a like timeline of how long people usually take to respond. So that's also a good barometer, because it may just be that, that particular agent takes 3 months to respond to a query. Um, so not discounting that piece of it, I think, is also really important.
Okay. There's a question here about word counts. Um, I don't see the name, but they're wondering, could an upmarket dual timeline thriller be pushed into the 100,000 word arena, or would that be an automatic rejection? How do you feel about books that are pushing 100,000 words or more?
It's tough,
Yeah.
especially as a debut author. And the thing to remember is, at least in my book, nothing is an automatic rejection. I mean, I've had queries that have had the wrong name, like someone who has said, "Dear agent," or, like people make mistakes. That's fine. It's never an automatic rejection. They still, are worth reading the entire thing. Um, However, that's going to be really long. And the agent then is basically, while they're reading the query, turning around to think about, okay, who are the editors that I can see pitching this, right? Who, who do I know that might be looking for a book like this? And for debut authors, also, because you don't have a proven sales record yet, the longer the book, the harder that's going to be to sell. In addition to just like word count conventions, right? A middle grade story shouldn't be 100,000 words, something like that. Um, but also, especially now, publishing has changed a lot in the last 5 years, the last 10 years, but like longer books cost more money to make. It's something even as simple as that is just, this is a business at the end of the day. And it's one that is very personal, but also very revenue driven. So if you have an upmarket thriller that's 80,000 words versus one that's 100,000 words, you're going to have better luck with it being 80,000.
Okay. Now you mentioned self-publishing
Mhm.
just a bit ago, and Lori is wondering that she says, "I noticed that you're open to self-published authors. How many books would a self-published author need to sell to get your attention?"
I'm going to say at least 25,000
25,000 books.
units.
Oh, I see. Right. Okay. That
Yeah.
makes sense. I took the question to be how many novels published,
Oh
or
my God.
but no, that's actually probably exactly what they were going for.
Um,
Yep.
I, it's a level that is constantly changing in comparison to what editors are telling us is their measure. So I have a couple of editors I'm thinking about right now who I chatted with, and they have on their end, an actual number of, okay, if it's a book talk book that has blown up, right? How many reviews they have to have on Goodreads in order for that editor to consider taking a look. So a lot of this is not coming from the agent. We're not the ones really making these rules. We're the ones adjusting our expectations and also trying to manage our writers' expectations. So that number shifts. And if you have a great book, if you have a self published book, um, you know, send it anyway. Again, that's going to be kind of my never self reject. Always just send it in.
Okay.
Never know what's going to happen.
Now, going back to the wish list, Heather
Mhm.
says, "I've spent a lot of time on manuscript wish list, and often I then look at the agent's page on the agency they work with, and the wish list says what they want isn't what they've been signing according to the agency page. How often is the wish list updated?"
Depends on the agent. We do seasonal updates at Rosecliff. That's just the way that our agency works. There are people who, again, there are as many answers as there are agents, which is so frustrating, right? I saying that, I'm like, I'm sorry as I'm conveying this knowledge to you it's just tough because some people are going to update their wish list once a year. Some people are going to update it every 3 months. Some people are just going to ask for, you know, dark romances that are fast paced and have series potential, right? So it really just depends on the agent or the agency.
Okay. Um, so there's a question from Sarah, who is an assistant at a literary agency and is interested in starting a list. How should she get started?
When you say building a list, Sarah, are you talking about what you want to represent? Or are you talking about actually the process of signing clients? Because if you're talking about like figuring out kind of what you want to represent, that's a very personal but such a fun question. Because this is when you get to do all the stuff that you've seen the people at your agency do, right? When I was interning, I started building my list when I was an intern because I was doing reader reports. I was very, very involved in, our like editor database at CMA. So I was constantly updating where people were, what they were looking for, who moved where. And so I had a really good like pulse on what the market was looking for, but I also have been a reader my whole life. I've been a storyteller my whole life. I have the things that I want and that I love and that I want to see more of. So it's at your core really, what do you what are the kind of books that you want to read and that you want to see on shelves? What are the kinds of stories that, you know, we need more of? For me, my first 3 clients were YA fantasy authors, because that has been just like my sweet spot, my safe place from the time I was a kid. And they all 3 of them write very different types of fantasy in the YA space. And as an agent, we have to read that book like 8 times, 9 times, between getting that first manuscript and it going out to editors sometimes, and then again, you have to read it after that. So it really does have to be something that is a balance of, okay, what should we be seeing more of? What does the market want right now? What are the trends, that are happening? And then what do you really want to represent? It's a super personal question, but I had so much fun when I was building my list. And I did it over the course of like 6 months before I was hired as an agent. So I'm very jealous that you get to do that because it's great.
Yeah. Um, I've heard, and there's a question in the chat, but I've heard of people who had an agent and for one reason or another had to change agents and start the search over and look for another one. So in this particular case, um, Alexis got an agent last August, but then was told that the agent is stepping back from agenting. And so she needed to find new representation without her book having gone out on submission. So, how would you recommend um, restarting that process? Would you put that in your query letter or, yeah?
I like to know. I actually have a on my submission form. It says, "Have you been represented?" Or have you sold books before? There's space for you to share that, especially if it's a which is so unfortunate. I'm so sorry that she went through this because there are a lot of agents that don't make it through the first couple of years, and which is a whole other segue that we could get into. But I would absolutely put that, especially if it sounds like, you had a good relationship, right? It's not like you parted on bad terms. It's likely that the agent will ask around, will maybe reach out to that agent to discuss. Um, it's a very small community, even though it feels very vast. So I would not hesitate in the slightest to put that out in a query letter.
You had mentioned when you were building the list, thinking about what books the world needed more of, or having your finger on the pulse of the literary world. What do you think are hard sells right now? And what do you think are genres that are like really popular or that are not oversaturated yet that people should focus on filling in some gaps?
Memoir is incredibly tough. Um, It's not a genre that I represent, nor is it one that I really want to dip my toe into because, oh, it's so rough. It's just they end up being lower sales numbers for the most part. It's a really lengthy process. Just, I've heard more and more from agencies and or agents and editors that that is becoming a tougher and tougher sell. What are agents and editors seeing too much of? Romantasy that is the same story of a 500-year-old white fae and a 19-year-old white girl who, against all odds, have made it work together and they fight a battle. People are bored of that. I'm bored of that. Very Eurocentric high or epic fantasy is just, we see it all the time, and it's, for the most part, really, really similar. Um, Romance is still an unbelievably hot category, even though um, you mentioned oversaturated. It's getting harder and harder for agents to sell if the hook isn't something new. So,
Mhm.
like, boy meets girl at a workplace, they have a meet cute, et cetera, right? Like, we've seen that done 100 times. But, um, I just took part in Smooch Pit, which was fantastic. And there was a pitch that immediately I was like, I have to see this. And it was, just to sort of sum up, a newscaster who, people weren't taking seriously, kind of like an Elle Woods vibe. She goes on like an Antarctic expedition to sort of prove her chops. And there's a scientist on that, and there's like, chaos ensues. And it's like, okay, we haven't seen that. That's a fresh take and something that immediately I was like, okay, my interest is piqued. Um, so that's sort of the three-part answer to those questions.
Now, what about, you mentioned memoir is a tough sell. What about memoir turned fiction? I think they might call that autofiction. Um,
I would just call it whatever genre of fiction you're writing in, because mentioning that it's a memoir, at least for me, is not going to help your case. Um, yeah, I would just say, is it your story and you've turned it into a romance? If you've turned it into a mystery story, if you've been inspired by events and you kind of have used that as inspiration for, you know, whatever this genre fiction is, then that's great. But memoir is just like its own beast. And so I would caution against having that be like the first line of your query.
okay. I worked in film for about 12 or 13 years. And for a while, there were a lot of movies that were like based on a true story.
Hmm.
But in this case, it sounds like that is actually not much of a selling point.
Yeah, and our it's a lot of changing tastes. It's a lot of, you know, people in TV and film are now much more risk averse to those kinds of stories. That's why we're seeing IP, there's another Harry Potter that's just being redone, that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, maybe it'll swing the other way. I would love that, but I'm not sure that that's going to be the case, and it's certainly not the case right now.
Claire is wondering, what about books that have a quieter, more traditional plot line rather than something that's more experimental or plot forward, maybe?
So, are you asking about it being like a character driven novel when you say quiet? And
I think usually when I think of quieter novels, yeah, it's less about the plot and more about the psychology of the characters, the development of the characters. Um, I think the question is, the writing is not super commercial and leans more literary. I've been
okay.
called upmarket, but I'm not sure if that's right. How would you market something like that?
literary fiction, it sounds like. It's hard to make a like totally clear judgment if I haven't read the work, but I will say, there is a very kind of clear line between genre fiction, which is like my bread and butter, and literary fiction. So, if that line level writing, if that prose, if that style is leaning literary, or it is a character driven story, right? That is very personal, a little more subtle. There's not, fairies running around, right? Like, and it's, I think your gut instinct is correct in that regard. Um, to have it really be positioned more as literary fiction.
Would you say that genre is not as difficult to sell as maybe some people think it is? Like LA says that they have a literary mythological historical fiction that they fear is too weird for literary fiction, but might also be too literary for genre fiction. Would you be interested in something like that? Or would they have an easy time finding an agent who is?
There were a lot of words used in that, and I understand that it's, uh, sometimes hard, especially for your own work, um, to really hone in on kind of what that through line is, but if I got that in a query, I would likely say no, only because if you can't explain specifically who it, in a one sentence pitch, like what it is, what's the hook, then how am I going to turn around and do the same thing?
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that it's not a fabulous book. It likely is. It sounds, I'm intrigued. You threw in historical, and now I was kind of like, well, I'm not sure. But, the literary piece, like, is that the style of prose? Is that, there's a lot going on there. And so I think, do you have a critique partner? Do you have a writing group? Those would be people that may help you get a little more perspective and distance on, okay, what's the story that I'm really telling?
Yeah. I think there are a lot of writers who are becoming more and more I don't wanna say interested because I think the interest has always been there, but they have more freedom to explore hybridity and blurring genres, and I think, there's a lot of interest in the market in that too, but there's also this fear of, like, "I don't know who to market this to. What if nobody's interested?" Um, how long would you recommend putting a book out, either on submission or looking for an agent before turning to self-publishing? And, your thoughts on self-publishing?
Self publishing is a valid and fantastic avenue to becoming a published author. Please don't let anybody make you feel like if you choose to pursue self publishing, that that is a less respectable route. It's not. It's incredible. It takes an unbelievable amount of work. And really the heart that people put into it is, I'm blown away. I'm blown away by that. So it is not something to turn your nose up at. It's incredible, and it is a very, very valid path to publishing. If you have been querying a book for a year and you have not gotten any takes from agents, if you've gotten no requests, that book is likely not ready to go out into the world. Again, this is where having a writing group is super helpful, because if you're the only person that has had eyes on your work at that point, there's a lot that you're missing. And I say that like gently because the feedback that you're going to get from people that you trust and from people that are also writers who can say, "Hey, I'm not totally following this plot line. Like, let's take a second look at that." Or you introduce this character on page 13 and then you never mention them again. Did they cease to exist? Those are all the things that are, going to be really, really beneficial for you on your querying journey and also just on your writing journey, right? To become a better writer. So everyone's timeline is different, but it's I would say if you've been out for a year, it's really time to pull it in and shelve it. It doesn't mean, again, it doesn't mean that the book will never be published. It just means that maybe that's not the right book for right now.
You had mentioned, that it takes outside perspective sometimes to help you see your work more clearly. And I want to
Yeah.
talk continue in just a second, but there's a question here where if it takes sometimes it takes a person outside the work to see it clearly for what it is. If the writer doesn't know how to succinctly pitch their novel in a single sentence hook, is that something you would work with them on, or would you just recommend that they keep working at it on their own before they continue to pitch? Or on their own or with, a workshop circle.
The optimistic, hopeful writer part of me is wants to say an agent will work with you on that. The reality is that they likely will not. They will have expected you to have done that work. And again, it's, something that I'm not sure that people know or are thinking about, because why would they, is that we work on commission, right? So we don't get paid until you get paid. So all of the work that we're doing when we're reviewing queries, when we are helping, when we're doing edit letters for our clients, when we are revising manuscripts, when we're researching editors, when we're doing all of that is unpaid. And it's because we believe in that book as a product and as a story. But so, as much as I would love to say that agents are going to be like, totally, let's work on this together, it's really your responsibility to make sure that you have that honed in before you're querying. And it will also help increase your request rates because then agents will know, oh, they get it, right? Like they understand their story on a level that I need so that I can turn around and think about all the other, sort of facets of my job. So it's a hard answer because I really would like the answer to be different, but yeah,
Mm.
I would your own group.
And it's valid to say sometimes we need help getting there. We can't just
Totally.
ourselves, but maybe somebody other than it can help us get there.
Yeah.
You had mentioned a critique circle, workshop partners. How important do you think it is for a writer to have community, and how do you think we can build one around their work?
It means it means everything. It's the it's the difference between, a good writer and a great writer in a lot of cases. I can see when no one else has looked at their work because there are things that, again, I, as an outsider, right, immediately would pick up on. Having that trusted circle of people is important for so many reasons, for personal reasons, right? Because writing is so personal, writing is so vulnerable, and it's so solitary. So being able to have a lifeline and say, oh, you understand what I'm going through because you've revised your book 4 times and we're still working on it, right? So on that level, it's critical, really. And then on a sort of craft level, people are able to give you feedback that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise. On a business level, if you decide to pursue traditional publishing, querying is, I mean, they call it the query trenches for a reason. It is a grueling process. And again, as much as I wish that that was different, it can be really demoralizing. And when you have agents that are just ghosting you completely, when you have, agents who are just saying no after 16 weeks of not responding, it's really rough, right? When you're taking this sort of personal thing that you've birthed and you're putting it out to essentially be judged. And that judgment is not a reflection of you as a writer or of you as a person. It's just a matter of the business, right? If it's going to be a fit. But being able to have that community to be like, man, I got 5 rejections today. And having somebody be like, I got 6, like we're in this together is I cannot stress the importance of it enough.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it really helps to normalize those rejections. I think
Yes.
especially in the beginning, rejections can be really scary, and it takes some time before they kind of roll off your back. And
Yeah.
knowing that other writers, who you consider to be good writers, right? Because rejections don't mean you're a bad writer.
Yeah.
Uh, knowing that they get them too really helps normalize it. Um, so there was a question here. Th- There's actually quite a few questions in here about. You mentioned memoir as a hard sell. What about a collection of essays or a collection of short stories? So that's fiction, but do you think that collections are uh, easy to sell, harder to sell than novels?
Harder because it's a smaller market,
Hmm.
but not impossible. Again, I don't represent like screenplays, I don't represent short stories, I don't represent anthologies, I don't represent novellas, even though I have read a couple of novellas by Meg Smitherman, if anybody has read her. She wrote a book called Thrum that was a novella that I still think about and is still so weird that it like sits with me. And then she ended up going on, and that was self-published, and then she ended up going on and working with an agent. But the market for those is slightly smaller, and that's not a good thing or a bad thing. It just means that you may have less opportunity to pitch agents because less agents are representing those categories.
Um, is there a category of nonfiction that you think is particularly popular, or is nonfiction just harder in general?
I mean, narrative nonfiction, you know, is does really well. Um, it's certainly not impossible or a much harder kind of area to sell within. We have an agent at Rosecliff, Arizona, who just does nonfiction. Um, there's a lot of space for it and a lot of opportunity to do really interesting things. Um, Cookbooks are hard, but they're I mean, I've seen some really incredible deals of things that I never would have thought of, and that's somebody who has a food background, right? And it's so I think there's not a lack of opportunities. It's just about finding somebody who is deeply entrenched in that space and will give your book its best chance for success.
So what about like a cookbook memoir? Like Water for Chocolate.
I would love that. I
Good.
would love This is the problem because my reader brain and my agent brain are sometimes at odds. And I grew up on like Calvin Trillin, like the Tummy trilogies, and I grew up on Bourdain, and there's a like Ruth Reichel, who was the editor at Savor, and I love food writing. It is something that is so hard to do, and when it's done well, it is incredible. It is so moving. It is really powerful, and it has the ability to really ground you into a particular kind of space that a lot of people like the restaurant industry is a little can be a little opaque at times, and so like there's a reason that The Bear was so successful, right? Um So it's not an easy sell, but it's one that I desperately want. So if you have a cookbook or if you are somebody who has, been in the restaurant industry for a long time and all of that, and you've written about it, I would love to see it, but I can't guarantee that I'm going to be able to sell it.
Yeah, food is one of those really interesting unifiers, right? Because it's like
Yes.
what we do every day, there's something really familiar and nourishing about it. But then there's like the possibility of adventure, of
Yeah.
learning some new flavor that you've never tried.
I have a just a sidebar that I think people will enjoy about that because um my my dad was a fabulous cook. My older brother is a chef. And the I mean, I grew up in a kitchen, or like we had Sunday dinner every night. I was very fortunate to have that, and food was really a lot of how we connected. And my friend was telling me the other day that well, the first time he remembered coming over to my house, and we were 12, was when we became friends. And we're 38 now. And he was like, I sat down and your dad put a plate of food down in front of me, and I recognized one thing on that plate. And that was it. But I learned about food and I learned about myself. And now he's like, I get to do that for my family. It's a connector in a way that a lot of things, just aren't anymore. So yeah, I could go on a whole we won't go off topic, but please send me cookbooks and food writing.
We found a genre for everyone to send your way.
Yes.
Um, Jacqueline says, I always said I would never write about the horrors of my British restaurant until I retired, and now I wonder if that would work. And
Right?
with stories, so maybe short stories around working in a restaurant.
Oh man, it's a
Rest-
ride.
okay. I think there's a recipe in here that Sean is sharing. Sounds amazing. So murakami yam, kogi infused Eastern butter, hazelnuts, and murakami yam smoked trout roe.
Ooh, I do like smoked trout.
Um,
Sorry, everyone, I've derailed us with the food conversation.
no, that's okay. I think food kind of has that. Ron says, I'm learning plot structure from books like Save the Cat. As an agent, how do you view stories with similar plot structures? Do these structures create formulaic stories? And also, do you have any recommendations for writers who, this is my add on, any book that you think would be really helpful for writers in either steering their work or revising their work? But I'll let you answer Ron's question first. How do you view stories with similar plot structures to Save the Cat? And do these structures create formulaic stories?
They do, but that's not a bad thing. Um, Save the Cat is fantastic. Uh, Readers of, again, this is like a lot of what I'm sharing is about genre fiction. So let's say you're a romance writer and you have a story that doesn't have a happily ever after or a happily for now. Readers are going to be pissed because there are certain conventions and plot points like the third act breakup and all of that that a reader of that genre expects when they read a story. And if you as the author don't deliver on that, you're going to be in a lot of trouble from a
That's so interesting as somebody who grew up reading Slavic literature, which loves unhappy endings. Um,
very different
yeah.
and something I probably would like to read. Um yeah, it is the who's a great resource for this is Savannah Gilbo. Um, she's fabulous. She's a friend. She's a an author accelerator certified book coach. She's a story grid editor. She has a podcast called Fiction Writing Made Easy, like 10 to 15-minute kind of like chunks of going over all of those story conventions, right? Talking about, she has a whole series on Save the Cat, like breakdown beat by beat. She's a definitely a great resource, and her website has a lot of information as well. Um, Lisa Lisa Cron, Wired for Story, is also another great resource because she talks about that again. How our brains, literally, we've been, orally telling stories forever. We started writing stories. They all have a structure. So do you want to call it formulaic? Sure, if that's, like if that feels right to you, but they there are conventions for a reason, and you also have to know the rules in order to break them. So those are two really important pieces of that. And yeah, I would say I actually did my thesis was in communication, and part of that was talking about Walter Fisher's narrative paradigm. And it's like there are certain things that, again, like we as humans, it's just the way that our brains work. So don't be afraid to use a formula first, if you want to call it a formula, and then mix it up. You don't. No one is going to get from like the midpoint to all is lost in the same way, even if they have the same story. So it's not something to shy away from. It's not something to be afraid of.
Yeah, and I think it's probably a pretty common phenomenon to recycle very similar sort of tropes or points, written in a completely different way, so that it's not
Totally.
yours. But if it worked 100 years ago, it'll probably work today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was your add-on to that? I want to make sure I address that.
My add-on was, and you sort of answered that. Are there any books that you recommend that can help
Oh.
writers with their craft?
Um
Okay.
or, just kind of generally to help your brain. Um Another one. This is hard because it's backwards. I'm sorry, everybody.
Oh, well, it's not backwards for me.
Oh, good. Okay.
So maybe everyone
Uh
else sees it the right way too.
and then that's another one.
Cool. Thank you for that.
Yeah, all next to my desk.
Um, there's Lori says that she has a spec fi novel that has a current of food running through it, and was planning on having a chef and I write a cookbook that connects with the story. Is that something that happens after the book is published, self or otherwise, or alongside?
Likely something that is published afterwards. I mean, you certainly could talk to your agent about it, if you were, again, going the traditional publishing route, but the imprint would have to buy both of those books either at the same time or one after the other. So you could try, but I wouldn't bet on it, as especially as, again, a debut author, and one that doesn't have an existing contract with a publisher.
Okay. We have a question about poetry, and I think this is something that really gets overlooked a lot as a genre when it comes to agents. I think a lot of agents, I don't see a lot of agents that are looking for poets. And one thing I've seen is poets who are agented often also write novels. And so they get represented that way. Um, Sean has a question about poetry. He says, I have friends who publish books but make no money. Is it still worth doing it?
If that's what you're if that's the way that you have to get your words out, then yes, of course it's worth doing. Writing is worth itself. Um, Publishing is fickle. It is inconsistent. Um, it's rough. There's a lot of confusion and a lot of misinformation. It's not reliable. even if you are Even if you're a fabulous writer. I mean, I saw something the other day that something like only 25% of debut novelists earn out their advance. Um, people, it's not, if you're looking to make money, then publishing poetry books is like probably not the way to go, but that doesn't mean that those poetry books shouldn't be out in the world.
Right.
And I don't, if people know about that, but it's like when you get an advance, that's not, it's not just like free money. You essentially have to like sell enough books to earn that out. Um, so it's tough, and it's a lot. But again, everyone here is likely a writer for a reason, and that's why you write. So as much as I wish I could publish every single book and have all of the people be happy, the business side of it is just tough.
Yeah. Yeah, I think poetry is especially tough to get rich on.
Yeah.
I don't know, as somebody who writes poetry, I don't know many poets who are in it for the money.
Yeah.
Um, so, um, but yes, it's absolutely worth doing anyway. I think if you're
Yeah.
driven to write poetry, there's probably nothing in the world that's going to deter you.
Mhm.
But it not,
And how great is that?
yeah, it not being commercially valued is certainly at the top of the list. That's of things that's not going to deter me. Uh, so, um, so if you are interested in making your debut, let's say you have a lot of ideas, um, different genres, different storylines. What would you recommend to someone as far as focusing on a genre or a plot point to um, focus their energy on to make their debut? If there's 100 books I want to write, where should I start?
The one that doesn't leave you alone when you're about to go to sleep. I cannot tell you how annoying it is. It's like those are the I'm not a published writer. I kudos to all of the people who do this, but again, I just write for myself because it's fun. And I no matter how long I stay away from it, I when I go to sleep in those kind of like 10 minutes right before, I'm in bed but I'm not quite asleep is when all of the things that have my characters have been trying to tell me or that the plot point that I was trying to work through, it's like my brain won't shut up. And so that's the one you start with. Don't let the market dictate any of that because you're going to learn more from finishing a first draft, right, of whatever that story is, than you are from starting and stopping on 50 of those 100 ideas.
Yeah, I love that point. It's the thing that you're obsessed with is the thing that you should be doing. Um,
Yes.
and
Always, in everything.
and there's no rule that says you need to sell them in order, right?
No.
Done with writing a book, you move on to the next one, and that next one might sell before the first one.
Yes. I
Yeah,
mean, that happens much more often than the first book that you write is the one that you query, is the one that you get an agent with, is the one that you sell. So that's, again, like finish the draft, move on to the next idea, come back to edit it, any of that. But write more in order to get better and don't rely on the first story that you write to be the one that gets you through the gates.
um, we are we have just a couple of minutes left. That hour went by so fast, and
It
there
did.
are a few questions we didn't get to, which I'm really sorry about. But I want to ask one question here because I think it's a really fun one. If you were a YA fantasy novel, what type of character would you be? Warrior, mage, cleric, something else?
I would be a hopefully less annoying version of Hermione Granger. I just, for me, there's nothing that can't be solved with reading and also just learning. Part of the reason that I love agenting so much and, every day is different. And I started in September, right? So we're not even I'm not close to even a full year in. And, but the ability to learn new things about writing, about this industry, about other agents every single day is something that I never take for granted and I love. So yeah, as much as I wish I could say that I was gonna like be the one with the sword, right? Like I don't have the skill set or like the drive to be able to, stab people, I don't think.
I don't think that we all have to be like the the biggest warrior character to
Yeah,
make.
that would not be me. Yeah.
One of the things that we were talking about before we started was your drive to make the publishing industry more transparent for writers,
Yeah.
and that's such an important role that you play as an agent to be able to do that. We have about a minute left if you wanted to talk about that at all as our
Sure, yes.
thought.
Um, it is a I mentioned how fickle and how really just like kind of old school the industry is, and that's changing, but it's not changing fast enough. And one of the reasons that I mean, I had talked to other agencies, but one of the reasons that I chose Rosecliff is because of Jessica Berg, who's the founder, her commitment to service and to transparency for people who are trying to pursue traditional publishing. It's hard enough. We don't have to make it harder by not giving away the information that people think needs to be kept secret. Like, it's just it's so silly to me, and so it's something that I'm really committed to. It's something that our agency is really committed to. It's we do a once a month roundtable for free for everybody who is. It's like a basically an AMA, and um, I just any opportunity that I can have to answer questions about what's happening in publishing behind closed doors, I'm overjoyed because it means that that information is being shared, and hopefully that writer can tell somebody else too. And if we can just simplify it and make it as transparent as possible, I mean, that's a really big part of my drive as an agent.
Yeah, that's amazing because we all have different talents, right? So leveling the
Yeah,
playing field, um,
absolutely.
disadvantage anybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kelsey, thank you so much. This was so
Thank
informative.
you.
It's been a pleasure to talk to you. I hope that this has been helpful for everyone at home, and I hope to have you back again. So, thank
Absolutely. This was great. Thank you guys so much for joining. You can find me on Instagram at Kelsey Evans Writes. Um, and then Rosecliff Literary as well. We have a lot of stuff going on there, events and everything. So yeah, come ask me questions. I'm happy to answer them if I can. And I really appreciate everybody taking an hour out of their day on Wednesday to go through this.
thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank
Have
you.
have a lovely evening. Bye.
You as well.